From Betrayal to Billionaire's Bride, a Vegas love story. It's 2:47 a.m. in a Las Vegas wedding chapel, and the neon cross above the altar flickers like a heartbeat against the desert night. Amara Baptiste stands there, paint still embedded under her fingernails from the masterpiece she completed just hours before her world shattered, staring into the eyes of a stranger whose name she learned only 6 hours ago. Dante Ashford. Even his name sounds like poetry, like something her artist's soul would paint in bold, sweeping strokes across a midnight canvas. The Elvis impersonator adjusts his rhinestone-studded collar and asks if they're ready to proceed, but time seems suspended in this moment of beautiful insanity. Amara's hands are trembling, not from the champagne they've been drinking, but from the electric current that shoots through her body every time Dante's fingers brush against hers. This man, this gorgeous stranger with eyes like storm clouds and a smile that makes her forget her own name, is about to become her husband. But here's where the story gets truly breathtaking, my beautiful family. Fast forward 8 months, and that same broken-hearted artist who fled to Vegas with nothing but a suitcase and a shattered heart is now standing in a penthouse that overlooks the glittering cityscape, wearing a silk dress that costs more than her old apartment's monthly rent. Dante's strong hands rest protectively on her rounded belly where 3 little heartbeats flutter like butterfly wings, triplets, creating the family she never dared to dream possible. The contrast is staggering, isn't it? From the woman who discovered her fiancé and best friend tangled together among her own artwork, to the confident wife of one of America's most powerful billionaires. But this isn't just a story about trading up or getting revenge on those who betrayed her. No, this is something far more profound. It's about a woman who learned that sometimes our most impulsive, seemingly reckless decisions are actually our soul's way of steering us toward our destiny. Let me take you back to that chapel moment, because the way their hands trembled when they reached for each other tells you everything you need to know about the kind of love that can't be planned, can't be controlled, and certainly can't be ignored. When Dante slipped that simple gold band, purchased from a Vegas gift shop just an hour earlier, onto Amara's finger, his voice cracked like a teenager's. Not because he was drunk, but because he was saying those 2 little words, "I do," with more conviction than he'd ever felt about anything in his carefully controlled life. And Amara? Sweet, wounded Amara, whose Creole grandmother always said that love finds you when you're not looking for it. She felt something click into place in her chest, like a lock finally finding its key after years of trying the wrong combinations. Standing there in her simple white sundress, bought in desperation from a boutique that stayed open late for exactly these kinds of Vegas emergencies, she realized this felt more real, more right, than her planned engagement to Garrett Mills ever had. How does a heartbroken artist who's never even been to a 5-star restaurant end up married to a man whose family owns half the luxury hotels in America? What happens when your worst night, the night you discover the 2 people you trusted most have betrayed you in the cruelest way possible, becomes the beginning of your greatest love story? And most importantly, how do you know when you should trust your heart over your head, especially when your heart has just been shattered into a million pieces? If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our Dear Love Diaries family. Your special place in this community of heartfelt stories is waiting for you. These passionate journeys of souls connecting against all odds have brought together thousands of beautiful hearts just like yours. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately when a new story unfolds in our diary of love. Hello once again, my beautiful Love Diaries family. Here we are, gathering once more around our virtual fireplace where the most extraordinary love stories unfold like chapters in the diary of the heart. I want you to imagine us all here together, you with your cup of tea or coffee, me with mine, sharing the kind of story that reminds us why we believe in love even when the world tries to convince us otherwise. This community we've built together has become something magical, hasn't it? A sanctuary where women from every corner of the world come to remember their worth, to be reminded that their value isn't determined by those who fail to see it, but by their courage to recognize it themselves. I'm curious, where in this beautiful world are you watching from today? Whether you're in a bustling city feeling overwhelmed by life's demands, or in a quiet village where you're the keeper of everyone else's dreams, drop your location in the comments below. Let's see how far our family of strong, beautiful hearts extends across this world. Amara Baptiste moved through her New Orleans art studio like jazz music made flesh, fluid, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. At 28, she had already established herself as one of the most promising mixed-media artists in the South, creating pieces that didn't just hang on walls but seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. Her Creole heritage showed in everything she touched, from the way she seasoned her morning coffee with a dash of cinnamon to how she layered colors on canvas like her grandmother layered flavors in her famous gumbo. The morning that would change everything started like any other. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of her converted warehouse studio, illuminating canvases that told stories of love, loss, betrayal, and redemption, though she didn't yet know how prophetic that last theme would become. Her latest piece, a swirling vortex of deep blues and angry reds titled Fractures, seemed to pulse with emotion. She'd been working on it for weeks, never quite understanding why she felt compelled to paint such raw heartbreak when her life seemed so perfectly arranged. Amara's hands, always paint-stained despite her best efforts, moved across the canvas with practiced grace. She had the kind of natural beauty that photographers spent hours trying to capture. Warm brown skin that seemed to glow from within, dark eyes that held depths of emotion, and curves that spoke of a woman comfortable in her own skin. When she painted, she became something ethereal, lost in a world where color and emotion merged into truth. "Morning, beautiful," came a voice from the studio's entrance. Garrett Mills, her fiancé of 8 months, stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing his usual expression of mild bewilderment at her creative process. Garrett was everything most women would consider a catch: successful lawyer, handsome in a conventional way, financially secure, and utterly predictable. He looked at her artwork the way someone might look at a foreign language they couldn't quite translate. "Thank you," she murmured, accepting the coffee while her eyes remained fixed on her canvas. Something about the piece felt unfinished, urgent, like it was trying to tell her something she wasn't ready to hear. "You've been working on that one for weeks," Garrett observed, settling into the leather chair she'd designated as his spot, far enough from her work area that he wouldn't accidentally disturb anything, close enough that they could maintain the pretense of sharing her creative space. "Maybe it's time to start something prettier? For the house?" There it was again, that subtle suggestion that her art should serve his vision of their future home. Amara felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she got when she tried to paint with colors that weren't quite right. But she pushed it aside, as she had learned to do over the months of their engagement. "This piece will be perfect for my opening tomorrow night," she said instead, adding a stroke of white that somehow made the entire composition come alive. "It's about transformation through pain." Garrett's phone buzzed, and he immediately became absorbed in whatever message demanded his attention. This too had become routine, his physical presence while his mind lived elsewhere. Amara found herself studying his profile, wondering when she had stopped feeling excited by his arrival and started feeling nothing at all. "Oh, Cordelia's coming by later," he mentioned without looking up from his phone. She wanted to discuss some details about tomorrow night. Cordelia Price. Amara's best friend since college, the one person who knew all her secrets, her dreams, her fears about whether she was talented enough to make it in the art world. Cordelia, with her perfectly coordinated outfits and her MBA and her way of making Amara feel both supported and slightly inadequate at the same time. "That's nice," Amara replied, though something flickered in her chest, not quite suspicion, but a painter's instinct for when colors don't quite harmonize the way they should. The afternoon passed in its usual rhythm. Garrett worked from her kitchen table, occasionally looking through her phone when she left it nearby, claiming he was worried about her art world friends and their influence on her. Amara painted, lost in the meditative flow of creation, while something nagged at the edges of her consciousness like a song she couldn't quite remember. When Cordelia arrived, she brought her usual energy, designer handbag, perfect makeup, and that slight air of someone who had their life completely figured out. She surveyed Amara's latest work with the expression of someone evaluating a business investment. "It's very intense," Cordelia said, tilting her head at fractures. "Are you sure it's the right piece for your opening? I mean, it's quite dark for what should be a celebration." Amara felt that familiar sting, the way Cordelia had of wrapping criticism in concern. "It's honest," she replied simply. "That's what my work is about." "Of course, darling. I just want tomorrow night to be perfect for you." Cordelia's smile was bright and sharp, like sunlight on broken glass. "You've worked so hard for this moment." The three of them fell into easy conversation about the opening, guest list, catering, which pieces would be featured. But Amara found herself watching the way Cordelia and Garrett looked at each other when they thought she wasn't paying attention. Quick glances, shared smiles, the kind of silent communication that spoke of inside jokes or shared secrets. "I should probably head home early tonight," Amara said eventually. "Big day tomorrow." "Actually," Garrett said, exchanging another look with Cordelia, "why don't you go ahead? Cordelia and I were going to finalize some of the details for tomorrow. You know how you get overwhelmed by all the logistics." There it was again, that gentle dismissal of her capabilities, wrapped in protection. Amara felt her grandmother's voice in the back of her mind. "Baby girl, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." But she pushed the thought away, kissed Garrett's cheek, hugged Cordelia goodbye, and headed home to her small apartment above a cafe, where the scent of beignet and coffee always welcomed her like an old friend. She spent the evening preparing for her opening, choosing her outfit, reviewing her artist's statement, trying to calm the nervous excitement that always preceded showing her soul to the world through her art. The next evening, Amara arrived at the Crescent Gallery an hour before the opening, wanting to see her work displayed one more time before the crowds arrived. She had chosen a flowing dress in deep emerald green that made her skin glow and her curves look like art themselves. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and she wore the antique gold earrings her grandmother had passed down to her, talismans of strength and heritage. The gallery looked magical in the evening light. Her paintings hung like windows into different emotional landscapes, each one a piece of her heart made visible. She walked slowly through the space, feeling that mixture of pride and vulnerability that came with exposing your deepest self to public judgment. She was studying her centerpiece, Fractures, when she heard sounds from the storage room at the back of the gallery. Laughter, low and intimate, followed by sounds that made her blood freeze in her veins. She moved closer, her heart beginning to race with a dread she couldn't name. The storage room door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, she saw them. Garrett and Cordelia, tangled together in passionate embrace among the extra canvases and exhibition materials. Cordelia's perfectly styled hair was mussed, Garrett's shirt unbuttoned, and they were lost in each other with an intensity Amara realized she had never seen in Garrett's eyes when he looked at her. The world tilted sideways. Amara gripped the doorframe, her body betraying her with violent trembling as she watched her fiancé and best friend, the two people she trusted most in the world, destroying everything she believed about her life in a single moment. "I can't wait much longer," Cordelia was whispering against Garrett's neck. "When are you going to tell her?" "After the opening," Garrett replied, his hands tangled in Cordelia's hair. "Let her have her moment, then we'll figure out how to handle the situation." Handle the situation. As if Amara's heart was a business problem to be solved. She backed away from the door, her hand pressed to her mouth to keep from making any sound. The gallery suddenly felt like a tomb, her artwork like funeral shrouds. Every piece she had created about love and trust and vulnerability now seemed to mock her from the walls. The opening began in 20 minutes. In 20 minutes, she would have to smile and shake hands and discuss her art while her entire world crumbled around her. She thought about confronting them, about screaming, about making a scene that would destroy not just her relationship but her career prospects as well. Instead, she did something that surprised even her. She walked to her purse, pulled out her phone, and took a photo of Fractures, the painting that had somehow predicted this moment. Then she walked out of the gallery, past the caterers setting up, past the early arrivals gathering on the sidewalk, past her entire carefully planned life. Dr. Evelyn Hart, her mentor and the gallery owner, called after her, but Amara couldn't stop. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but move forward through the New Orleans evening that suddenly felt cold despite the warm spring air. She found herself at her apartment, throwing clothes into a suitcase with shaking hands. Her phone buzzed constantly. Garrett, Cordelia, Dr. Hart, other friends who had heard something was wrong. She ignored them all. On impulse, she opened her laptop and booked the first flight she could find leaving New Orleans. Las Vegas. The city of impulsive decisions and fresh starts. It seemed fitting. As her plane lifted off from New Orleans, Amara stared down at the city lights and felt something shift inside her chest. The woman who had been shrinking herself to fit into other people's expectations was gone. She didn't know who she would become, but she knew with absolute certainty that she would never again make herself smaller for anyone's comfort. Vegas beckoned like a neon promise, and for the first time in months, Amara felt truly alive. Chapter 2. The Bellagio's high roller bar was exactly what Amara needed, dimly lit, expensive enough to keep the casual tourists away, and anonymous enough that she could fall apart without anyone from her real life witnessing it. She had used the money from her gallery opening, money that should have been celebrating her artistic triumph, to book herself into a suite that cost more per night than she usually spent in a month. If she was going to have a breakdown, she reasoned, she might as well do it in style. She sat at the marble bar in her emerald dress, now wrinkled from travel, nursing a glass of champagne that tasted like bitter tears. Her phone had finally stopped buzzing with calls from Garrett and Cordelia. Probably too busy planning their next moves to keep pestering her with fake concern. Rough night? The voice beside her was warm, rich, with the kind of cultured accent that spoke of boarding schools and inherited confidence. Amara turned to find herself looking into the most extraordinary pair of gray-blue eyes she'd ever seen. The man sitting 2 stools away had the kind of face that belonged in Renaissance paintings: strong jaw, high cheekbones, dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it. He was obviously wealthy, from his perfectly tailored shirt to the expensive watch he was unconsciously twisting around his wrist, but something in his expression told her he was running from something too. "You could say that," she replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "You?" He laughed, a sound that had no humor in it. "Let's just say I discovered that the life I thought I wanted might not actually be mine." He signaled the bartender for another whiskey, then seemed to really look at her for the first time. "I'm Dante." "Amara." She found herself studying his face, her artist's eye cataloging the way shadows fell across his features, how his mouth quirked slightly to one side when he smiled. "What brings you to Vegas? Besides running away from your life?" "Business conference that turned into an existential crisis," he said, then paused. "What about you? And please don't say a bachelorette party, because I'm not sure my faith in humanity can take another hit tonight." Despite everything, Amara felt her lips curve into what might have been a smile. "Worse. I just discovered my fiancé and best friend are having an affair. At my art opening. Literally surrounded by paintings about love and trust." Dante winced. "Christ. That's actually worse than a bachelorette party." "The universe has a twisted sense of humor," Amara agreed, taking another sip of champagne. Something about this stranger made her want to talk, to be honest, in a way she hadn't been in months. "What kind of existential crisis brings a man in $1,000 shirt to a Vegas bar? How do you know it's $1,000 shirt?" "I'm an artist. I notice details. Plus, you keep removing your cufflinks like they're handcuffs." Dante looked down at his hands, surprised to find he had indeed removed his platinum cufflinks and was rolling them between his fingers like worry stones. "I spent the day in meetings about my future, having people tell me what I should want, who I should marry, how I should live. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time I made a decision based on what I actually wanted instead of what was expected." There was something in his voice that resonated in Amara's chest, a recognition of kindred spirits caught in lives that no longer fit. "What do you want?" she found herself asking. "Right now? To buy you another drink and hear about your art. To have a conversation with someone who doesn't want anything from me except honesty." He turned on his stool to face her fully. "What do you want?" Amara considered the question seriously. What did she want? For the first time in months, the answer came clearly. To feel real again. To remember what it's like to be seen by someone who isn't trying to change me or use me or make me smaller to fit their vision of who I should be. Their eyes met and held, and Amara felt something electric pass between them. Not just attraction, though God knew this man was gorgeous enough to make her forget her own name, but something deeper. Recognition. Like looking into a mirror and seeing not your reflection, but your soul. "Can I buy you dinner?" Dante asked. "Somewhere we can actually hear each other think?" 3 hours later, they were sitting in a quiet corner of the hotel's most exclusive restaurant, and Amara couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed so much. Dante was nothing like she'd expected from a man who could casually afford a meal that cost more than most people's car payments. He was funny, self-deprecating, and genuinely interested in her work, her thoughts, her dreams. "So you just walked out?" he asked after she'd told him the whole story of her evening. "Left your own opening?" "I couldn't stay and pretend," Amara said, twirling pasta around her fork. "I couldn't smile and make small talk about my art while my whole life was a lie. Better to be honest about being a mess than fake being fine." "I admire that," Dante said quietly. "I've spent so many years being what other people needed me to be, I'm not sure I remember who I actually am anymore." The wine had loosened both their tongues, and they found themselves sharing things they'd never told anyone. Dante talked about the pressure of inheriting a business empire before he was ready, about how every relationship felt like a transaction, how he'd been engaged twice to women who loved his status more than his soul. Amara told him about growing up working class in New Orleans, about how success in the art world felt fragile and undeserved, about how she'd been shrinking herself to fit Garrett's vision of appropriate. "You know what's crazy?" Amara said as they shared dessert, both of them far more wine-drunk than was probably wise. "I feel more like myself talking to you, a complete stranger, than I have in months with people who supposedly know me." "That's because they don't know you," Dante said, his eyes intense in the candlelight. "They know the version of you that you thought they wanted. This," he gestured between them, "this is you being real. Has anyone else ever felt like they were dimming their own light to make someone else comfortable? Share your experience in the comments. This community is built on the strength we find in each other's stories." The conversation flowed like wine, like music, like something that had been waiting years to happen. They talked about art and business, about dreams deferred and roads not taken, about what it meant to live authentically in a world that rewarded performance over truth. And underneath it all was an electric current of attraction that grew stronger with each shared laugh, each moment their hands accidentally touched reaching for the same bread roll. "I have a confession," Dante said as they walked through the casino afterward, neither wanting the evening to end. "I haven't felt this connected to another person in, maybe ever." Amara stopped walking, the noise of slot machines and excited gamblers fading into background music. "Dante. I know it's crazy. I know we just met. But something about tonight feels like..." He ran his hand through his hair, searching for words. "Like I've been waiting my whole life for this conversation." She knew exactly what he meant. Standing there in the middle of a Las Vegas casino, surrounded by people making impulsive decisions they'd probably regret, Amara felt more certain of something than she had in years. "What if we didn't overthink this?" she heard herself saying. "What if we just followed our instincts for once?" Dante moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, could count the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "What are you suggesting? Vegas is famous for impulsive decisions, right?" Her heart was racing, but her voice was steady. "What if we made one? Amara. His voice was rough with something that might have been desire or might have been disbelief. "Marry me," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I know it's insane. I know we just met. But I also know that I've never felt more myself than I do right now, talking to you. And if we're both running from lives that don't fit anymore, maybe we should run towards something instead." For a moment, Dante just stared at her, and Amara wondered if she'd finally lost her mind completely. Then his face broke into a grin that transformed his entire appearance from mysterious businessman to mischievous boy. "Yes," he said simply. "God help us both, but yes." The wedding chapel they found was exactly what you'd expect from Vegas at 2:47 a.m., neon crosses, plastic flowers, and an Elvis impersonator who took his role as minister surprisingly seriously. As they stood before the tacky altar, hands trembling as they reached for each other, Amara felt something settle into place in her chest. "Do you, Dante, take Amara to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Elvis asked, his voice carrying surprising dignity despite the rhinestone jumpsuit. "I do," Dante said, his voice cracking with emotion that caught them both off guard. He meant it, Amara realized. This stranger, this beautiful, complicated man she'd known for 6 hours, meant those words with every fiber of his being. "Do you, Amara, take Dante to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Amara looked into his eyes and saw her future reflected there, uncertain, impulsive, absolutely terrifying, and more real than anything she'd ever experienced. "I do," she whispered, and meant it more than she'd ever meant anything. The kiss that sealed their marriage was desperate, passionate, full of promise and fear and the intoxicating rush of two people choosing to leap without looking. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Elvis was beaming at them with genuine joy. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the handful of other couples waiting their turn, "Mr. and Mrs. Ashford." Mrs. Ashford. Amara Baptiste Ashford. The name felt like a song she'd been humming her whole life without knowing the words. They stumbled back to Dante's suite, which she now realized was more like a private apartment than a hotel room, giddy with champagne and adrenaline and the surreal reality of what they'd just done. In the elevator, pressed against each other in the small space, the magnitude of their impulse began to sink in. "We just got married," Amara said, staring at the simple gold band on her finger. "We just got married," Dante agreed, his thumb tracing the matching ring on his own hand. "To complete strangers. Are you having second thoughts?" He turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face. "The only thing I'm second-guessing is why it took me 33 years to do something this honest." The elevator doors opened onto his floor, but neither of them moved. They stood there, holding each other's gaze, balanced on the precipice between their old lives and whatever came next. "No matter what happens," Dante said quietly, "tonight was real. This feeling," he pressed his hand to his chest, "this is real." Amara rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and sure. "Then let's see where real takes us." Sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows woke Amara the next morning, and for a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The bed was obscenely comfortable, wrapped in sheets that felt like silk clouds, and the view beyond the windows showed Las Vegas spread out like a glittering toy city. Then she saw the gold ring on her finger, and everything came flooding back. She was married. To Dante Ashford, the mysterious stranger who had somehow seen straight through to her soul in a single evening. She could hear movement in the suite's other room, the soft clink of china and the rich aroma of coffee that smelled far more expensive than anything she'd ever tasted. Slipping on the silk robe she found hanging in the bathroom, a bathroom that was larger than her entire New Orleans apartment, she noted with mild hysteria, Amara padded barefoot toward the sounds of life. Dante stood at the kitchen island, fully dressed in fresh clothes that somehow fit perfectly despite being purchased from the hotel's emergency wardrobe service. He was pouring coffee into delicate porcelain cups that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget, and when he looked up and saw her, his entire face softened with something that looked dangerously like tenderness. "Good morning, Mrs. Ashford," he said, and the name sent shivers down her spine. "Good morning, Mr. Ashford," she replied, accepting the coffee cup with hands that were steadier than she felt. "So, we really did that. We really did." He was studying her face carefully, as if trying to gauge her mood, her regrets, her plans for escape. "How are you feeling about it in the harsh light of day?" Amara considered the question seriously, taking a sip of coffee that was indeed the best she'd ever tasted. How did she feel? Terrified, certainly. Exhilarated. Confused. But underneath it all was something she hadn't expected, a sense of rightness, as if all the chaotic decisions of the past 24 hours had been leading her exactly where she needed to be. "Like I've never made a better decision in my life," she said honestly. "Which is terrifying, because I barely know you." Dante's smile was brilliant with relief. "What would you like to know?" "Everything. But we have time for that, don't we?" She settled onto one of the bar stools, suddenly aware of how surreal this domestic scene was. "What I really want to know is, what happens now?" "Now," Dante said, moving around the counter to stand closer to her, "we figure out how to make this work. If you want to, that is." "I want to," Amara said, surprising herself with how quickly the answer came. "But I should probably tell you some things about me first. I don't come from money. I drive a car that's older than some of my art students. I've never owned anything that didn't come from a thrift store or a discount rack. And I have absolutely no idea how to be married to someone who can afford a hotel suite that costs more per night than I make in a month." Dante was quiet for a long moment, and Amara felt her stomach clench with the certainty that reality was about to crash their beautiful fantasy. "Amara," he said finally, his voice gentle, "there are some things I need to tell you too. Starting with the fact that I'm not just wealthy, I'm significantly wealthy. Like, Forbes list wealthy." The coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "How significantly?" "Billionaire significantly." The cup made it safely to the counter, though Amara couldn't remember setting it down. "Billionaire. My family owns Ashford Holdings. Hotels, resorts, some tech companies. I inherited it when my parents died, and I've expanded the portfolio considerably since then." Amara stared at him, her artist's mind trying to catalog all the details she'd missed the night before. The quality of his clothes, yes, but also the way the hotel staff had treated him, the private elevator to this floor, the casual way he'd ordered wine that probably cost more than her rent. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that I married a billionaire. In Vegas. After knowing him for 6 hours. You're telling me," Dante countered, "that I married an artist who makes me feel more alive than I have in years. After knowing her for 6 hours. They stared at each other across the gleaming kitchen island, the magnitude of their situation settling around them like morning mist. "This is insane," Amara whispered. "Completely insane," Dante agreed. "We should probably get an annulment." "Probably." Neither of them moved toward the phone. "The thing is," Amara said after a long pause, "I've spent my whole life making careful, sensible decisions. Choosing the safe path, the predictable relationship, the conventional career moves. And where did it get me? Engaged to a man who was cheating with my best friend, that's where. I've spent my whole life having other people make my decisions for me," Dante said. "Board members, advisors, family friends who think they know what's best for the Ashford legacy. And I've been miserable. So maybe," Amara said, her heart beginning to race again, "maybe this crazy, impulsive thing is actually the first honest choice either of us has made in years." Dante moved closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, close enough that his cologne made her think of expensive whiskey and midnight promises. "Maybe," he said softly, his hand coming up to trace the line of her jaw, "we should find out what happens when we choose each other instead of letting other people choose for us." The kiss was different from their wedding kiss, less desperate, more exploratory. A question being asked and answered with lips and breath and the soft sound Amara made when Dante's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. When they broke apart, both breathing harder than the simple kiss warranted, the air between them shimmered with possibility. "So," Amara said, her voice slightly breathless, "what does a billionaire do on his honeymoon in Vegas?" Dante's smile was wicked and warm. "Whatever his wife wants to do." They spent the day like tourists, like newlyweds, like two people determined to learn everything about each other in the space of 24 hours. Dante took her shopping, not in the tourist traps but in the kind of boutiques where personal shoppers appeared with champagne and private dressing rooms. He watched with obvious delight as Amara tried on clothes that fit her body like they'd been designed specifically for her curves, his eyes darkening with appreciation when she emerged in a flowing sundress that made her skin glow like burnished gold. "You don't have to buy me things," she protested when he handed his black card to the sales associate without even looking at the total. "I'm not buying you things," Dante replied, his hands settling on her waist as he spoke into her ear. "I'm buying my wife things. There's a difference." "My wife." The word sent heat spiraling through her belly, and she saw in his eyes that he'd noticed her reaction. They had lunch at a restaurant with a months-long waiting list that somehow had a table available immediately when Dante called. They walked through art galleries where Amara critiqued the pieces with the kind of passionate intelligence that made Dante want to kiss her senseless. They sat by the pool, talking and laughing and slowly piecing together the stories of their lives. "Tell me about your family," Dante said as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades that reminded Amara of her paintings. "My grandmother raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, Amara said, unconsciously leaning into his side on the poolside lounge chair. "She was this incredible woman, tiny but fierce, full of stories about our Creole ancestors and their magic. She taught me that art wasn't something you did, it was something you were. That creativity was the closest thing to prayer she knew." "She sounds amazing." She was. "She died 2 years ago, right before I met Garrett. I think." Amara paused, considering her words. "I think I was so lonely after losing her that I settled for the first person who seemed stable and safe. I wasn't looking for passion, I was looking for security." Dante's arm tightened around her. "What are you looking for now?" Amara turned to face him, studying the way the setting sun cast shadows across his strong features. "Authenticity. Someone who sees me, really sees me, and isn't trying to change what they find." "And what do you see when you look at me?" Dante asked quietly. "A man who's spent so long being what everyone else needed that he's forgotten who he actually is," Amara said without hesitation. "But also someone with the most beautiful soul I've ever encountered. Someone who makes me feel like I can be completely myself without apology." That night, they had dinner in his suite, room service that arrived on silver platters with more courses than Amara could count. But she barely tasted the food, too intoxicated by the conversation, by the way Dante listened to her like every word was precious, by the growing tension between them that felt like a violin string being slowly tightened. "Dance with me," Dante said suddenly, standing and extending his hand. "There's no music." "There's always music," he replied, pulling her into his arms in the suite's living room. "You just have to know how to listen for it." They swayed together in the silence, and Amara realized he was right. There was music in the rhythm of their breathing, in the soft whisper of fabric against fabric, in the beating of two hearts learning to synchronize. When she looked up at him, his eyes were dark with something that made her pulse flutter wildly. "Amara," he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. "I know," she whispered, and rose on her toes to kiss him. This kiss was nothing like the others, it was fire and promise and the kind of passion that poets spent lifetimes trying to capture in words. Dante's hands tangled in her hair, and Amara felt herself melting against him, her body responding to his touch like it had been waiting her entire life for this moment. "Are you sure?" he asked against her lips, his control hanging by a thread. "I've never been more sure of anything," she breathed, and meant it. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to the bedroom where moonlight streamed through the windows like a blessing. What happened next was tender and passionate and transformative in ways that had nothing to do with the physical act and everything to do with two souls recognizing their perfect match. Afterward, as they lay tangled in silk sheets with Amara's head on Dante's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow back to normal, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not just satisfaction or contentment, but a deep sense of rightness, as if every choice she'd ever made had been leading her to this moment, this man, this unexpected love story. No regrets? Dante asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Only that we waited so long to do that, Amara replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. His laugh rumbled through his body into hers. We've known each other less than 24 hours. And yet it feels like I've been waiting my whole life to find you. 3 weeks later, they were still in Las Vegas, extending their impromptu honeymoon while figuring out how to merge their completely different worlds. Dante had postponed meetings and rearranged his schedule, claiming he was conducting important business negotiations, when really he was spending his days learning everything there was to know about his extraordinary wife. Amara had spoken to Dr. Evelyn Hart, her mentor, who was equal parts shocked and delighted by the news. The gallery opening had gone ahead without her, with Dr. Hart explaining to guests that the artist had been called away on urgent personal business. Several pieces had sold, including Fractures, which somehow felt appropriate, letting go of the pain that had brought her to this new beginning. She had also finally answered Garrett's increasingly frantic calls, telling him simply that she was married now and wished him and Cordelia well. His stunned silence had been oddly satisfying. "I need to go back to San Francisco eventually," Dante said one morning as they shared breakfast on the suite's private balcony. "There are board meetings I can't postpone much longer, and my assistant is starting to stage what I think might be a revolt." "I need to go back to New Orleans too," Amara replied, though the thought of leaving this bubble they'd created filled her with unexpected anxiety. "I have a studio, and contracts, and a life I need to figure out how to either pack up or incorporate into this." They'd been dancing around this conversation for days, the practical reality of being married to someone whose life was on the opposite side of the country. But as they sat in the morning sunshine, both acutely aware that their Vegas fantasy would have to end soon, Dante reached across the table and took her hand. "Come with me," he said simply. "To San Francisco. Let me show you my world, and we'll figure out how to make it ours." Amara felt her breath catch. "Dante. I know it's a lot to ask. I know you have your own career, your own dreams. But we can figure it out together. I can set up a studio for you anywhere you want, in the house, in a separate building, wherever you'll be happiest. And if you hate it, if any of it feels wrong, we'll try something else. What about your family? Your business associates? What are they going to think when you show up with a wife they've never heard of?" Dante's jaw tightened slightly. "My Aunt Constance will have opinions, certainly. And there will probably be some adjustment period. But Amara, I don't care what they think. For the first time in my life, I'm making decisions based on what I want, not what other people expect. And what I want is you." The intensity in his voice, the way he looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked, made Amara's heart race with hope and terror in equal measure. "Okay," she heard herself saying. "Yes. Let's go to San Francisco." Dante's smile was brilliant with relief and joy. "Really? Really? But I have one condition." "Anything. I need to go back to New Orleans first. To pack up my studio, to say goodbye properly, to close that chapter of my life the right way. And I want you to come with me. You want me to meet your world. I want my husband to see where I come from, to understand the woman he married." Amara squeezed his hand. "Besides, you haven't lived until you've had my grandmother's gumbo recipe made with proper New Orleans ingredients." 2 days later, they landed in New Orleans, and Amara felt a strange mixture of homecoming and displacement as the humid, jazz-scented air enveloped them. This city had shaped her, made her, and now she was bringing her new husband to see the woman she'd been before she became his wife. Dante was quiet as their car, a simple rental, not the luxury vehicles he was used to, drove through the French Quarter toward Amara's neighborhood. She watched him take in the colorful shotgun houses, the street musicians, the general atmosphere of beautiful chaos that was New Orleans. "It's incredible," he said softly. "I can see why your art has such life in it. This place, it breathes creativity." Amara's studio was exactly as she'd left it, though someone, probably Dr. Hart, had been watering her plants and collecting her mail. Dante stood in the center of the space, turning slowly to take in her paintings, her works in progress, the controlled chaos of an artist's life. "This is where you created those pieces I saw in the gallery photos," he said, stopping in front of her easel where a half-finished painting waited for her return. "This is where I figured out who I was," Amara replied. "At least, who I thought I was." "And who are you now?" She moved to stand beside him, looking at her work through his eyes. Seeing not just the technical skill but the emotion, the raw honesty, the fearless way she'd put her heart on canvas for the world to see. "I'm the same woman," she said slowly. "But now I'm also someone who's brave enough to choose love over safety. Someone who believes she deserves to be cherished instead of tolerated." That evening, they had dinner with Dr. Hart at her favorite restaurant in the Garden District. Amara watched nervously as her mentor and her husband sized each other up, but her fears proved groundless. Dr. Hart was charmed by Dante's genuine interest in Amara's work and his obvious adoration of his wife. "You know," Dr. Hart said as they shared dessert, "I've been worried about our Amara for months. She was dimming, becoming smaller, losing the fire that made her art so compelling. But look at her now, she's radiant. Whatever you're doing, Mr. Ashford, keep doing it." "She makes it easy," Dante replied, his hand finding Amara's across the table. "She's the most extraordinary woman I've ever met." Later, as they walked through the moonlit streets of the French Quarter, Amara felt the last pieces of her old life settling into place with her new one. She was saying goodbye to the woman who had been afraid to take up space, afraid to demand more, afraid to believe she was worthy of the kind of love that wrote songs and painted masterpieces. "Thank you," she said suddenly, stopping beneath a streetlight that cast golden circles on the ancient cobblestones. "For what?" "For seeing me. For choosing me. For making me brave enough to choose myself." Dante cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize she was crying. "Thank you for saving me from a life that was killing me slowly. For showing me what it feels like to be alive." Their kiss there in the street, surrounded by the music and magic of New Orleans, felt like a benediction and a promise. They were no longer the broken people who had fled to Vegas seeking escape. They were partners, lovers, husband and wife, ready to build something beautiful together. The next morning brought a surprise that would change everything. Amara woke feeling slightly nauseated, a sensation she initially attributed to too much rich Creole food and champagne. But when the feeling persisted for several days, along with an exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure and a heightened sensitivity to smells, she began to suspect something miraculous might be happening. Have you ever had someone see the real you and love what they found? Share how it felt to be truly recognized. Your stories inspire others to believe they deserve that same beautiful recognition. The pregnancy test she took in her tiny New Orleans bathroom showed 2 pink lines that seemed to glow with possibility. Amara stared at it for a long moment, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat belly where new life might be growing. She found Dante in her studio, studying her latest painting with the intense focus he brought to everything that mattered to him. When she appeared in the doorway holding the test, his eyes immediately went to her face, reading her expression with the intuition that had developed between them. "Is that?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "It is." Amara moved into his arms, feeling the rightness of being held by this man who had become her anchor in the storm of change. "We're having a baby, Dante." His response was immediate and overwhelming, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around the studio, both of them laughing with joy and disbelief. When he set her down, his hands immediately went to her waist, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. "A baby," he whispered, wonder and terror warring in. "Are you happy?" Amara asked, suddenly uncertain. They'd never discussed children, never planned for this possibility in their whirlwind romance. "Happy?" Dante's laugh was breathless with emotion. "Amara, I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed. I never imagined I could have this. A real family, with someone who loves me for who I am instead of what I can provide." That afternoon, a doctor's visit confirmed what the test had suggested, with one stunning addition: the ultrasound showed not one heartbeat, but 3. Triplets, the doctor said with a smile, pointing to the grainy images on the screen. "Congratulations, you're having triplets." Amara felt the world tilt sideways as Dante's hand tightened around hers. Triplets. 3 babies. Their Vegas wedding night had created not just one new life, but 3. "Healthy?" Dante asked, his voice rough with emotion. "All 3 appear to be developing perfectly," the doctor assured them. "Though you should know that triplet pregnancies require more monitoring and care than single births." As they left the doctor's office, both clutching ultrasound photos like precious treasures, Amara felt the magnitude of how completely her life had transformed in just a few weeks. From betrayed and broken artist to married billionaire's wife to expectant mother of triplets, it was enough to make anyone dizzy. 3 babies, Dante said as they sat in the car, still processing the news. 3 little people who are half you and half me. Are you overwhelmed? Amara asked, studying his profile for signs of panic or regret. Instead, she saw something that made her heart swell with love, pure, undiluted joy mixed with fierce protectiveness. Overwhelmed, yes. But Amara, look what we've created. He turned to face her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. 3 miracles. Proof that love can literally create life. That night, as they lay in her small New Orleans bed, Dante's hand resting protectively on her belly where their children were growing, Amara felt a peace she'd never experienced before. This was right. This unexpected, impossible love story was leading them exactly where they were meant to be. "I love you," Dante said into the darkness, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "I love you too," Amara replied, meaning it with every cell of her being. Outside, New Orleans sang its ancient songs of love and magic, and inside, 2 hearts beat in perfect synchronization while 3 new ones grew strong and steady, preparing to join their parents' extraordinary love story. Chapter 3. 3 weeks later, Amara stood on the terrace of Dante's San Francisco mansion, watching the fog roll in over the bay like a silk scarf being drawn across the city's throat. The house, though calling it a house felt inadequate for the architectural marvel that sprawled across 2 acres of prime Pacific Heights real estate, still felt surreal, like she was living in someone else's dream. The moving truck from New Orleans had arrived that morning, and seeing her easels and canvases and paint-stained furniture arranged in rooms that cost more to heat than most people's annual salaries created a strange cognitive dissonance. Her grandmother's rocking chair looked tiny in the grand living room with its soaring ceilings and museum-quality art collection. "How are you settling in?" came a familiar voice behind her. Amara turned to find Iris Delacroix climbing the terrace steps, her loyal friend's face bright with curiosity and concern. Iris had flown out from New Orleans for an extended visit, officially to help Amara settle into her new life, but really to ensure that her friend hadn't lost her mind completely in marrying a stranger. "It's an adjustment," Amara admitted, accepting the cup of tea Iris offered. "Yesterday I tried to make coffee and ended up accidentally activating some sort of smart home system that started playing opera throughout the entire house." Iris laughed, settling into one of the wrought iron chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars. "And how's Prince Charming handling having a very pregnant wife who keeps rearranging his perfectly organized life?" "He's been incredible," Amara said, her hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly where the triplets were making their presence increasingly known. At 4 months pregnant, she was already showing more than most women did at 6 months. He converted the entire West Wing into a studio for me, complete with north-facing windows and climate control for my canvases. And he's been researching everything about triplet pregnancies like it's a business acquisition he needs to master. But? Iris prompted, recognizing the note in her friend's voice that suggested complications lurking beneath the surface. Amara sighed, watching a yacht navigate the choppy waters of the bay. His family is challenging. His Aunt Constance has been making polite but pointed comments about the speed of our courtship and the timing of my pregnancy. And there's this woman, Scarlett Pemberton, who keeps showing up at social events with very pointed questions about my background. Ah, Iris said knowingly. The ex-girlfriend who thought she had claim to the throne. Something like that. She's everything I'm not, old money, socially connected, the kind of woman who was probably groomed from birth to be some billionaire's wife. She keeps making comments about how interesting it must be for Dante to experience such a different perspective on life. Before Iris could respond, the sound of a car in the driveway caught their attention. Dante appeared on the terrace moments later, still in his business suit but with his tie loosened and his hair slightly mussed from running his fingers through it, a habit Amara had learned meant he was stressed about something. How was the board meeting? Amara asked, rising to kiss him hello and immediately sensing the tension in his shoulders. Productive, Dante said carefully, then seemed to notice Iris for the first time. Iris, wonderful to see you again. How are you finding San Francisco? Expensive, Iris replied with a grin. But the company is excellent. Dante's smile was genuine but strained, and Amara could see he was choosing his words carefully. Actually, there's something I need to discuss with both of you. The board has decided to throw a welcome party for Amara. A chance for San Francisco society to meet my wife officially. Amara felt her stomach clench, and not from morning sickness. What kind of party? The kind where everyone who matters in this city will be watching your every move, analyzing your background, and deciding whether you're worthy of the Ashford name, Dante said with bitter honesty. I tried to decline, but Constance made it clear that refusing would be politically unwise for the company. Politics, Iris muttered. Even marriage comes with politics when you're rich enough. I don't know how to do this, Amara said quietly, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. I don't know how to be the kind of wife they expect. Dante was beside her immediately, his arms encircling her from behind, his hands covering hers on their growing children. You don't have to be anything other than exactly who you are. The woman I fell in love with, the artist whose work makes people stop and really see the world differently. If they can't appreciate that, then they don't deserve to know you. Easy to say, Amara replied, leaning back against his chest. Harder to believe when you're the one being judged. The party was scheduled for the following weekend, giving Amara exactly 7 days to mentally prepare for what felt like trial by social fire. The guest list read like a who's who of West Coast power brokers, tech moguls, old money families, politicians, and cultural influencers who could make or break reputations with a single well-placed comment. Iris appointed herself Amara's fairy godmother for the occasion, insisting on a shopping expedition that took them to the kind of boutiques where personal shoppers appeared with champagne and private consultations. The maternity dress they finally selected was a masterpiece of elegant simplicity. Midnight blue silk that skimmed Amara's curves and made her pregnancy look like a celebration rather than something to hide. You look like a queen, Iris declared as they stood before the boutique's three-way mirror. A very pregnant, very beautiful queen who could buy and sell half the women at this party. I'm not buying or selling anyone, Amara protested. I just want to get through the evening without embarrassing Dante or myself. Honey, Iris said seriously, meeting her eyes in the mirror, you could never embarrass him. The way that man looks at you? Like you hung the moon and painted the stars. Trust me, he's going to spend the entire evening bursting with pride. The night of the party arrived with unseasonable rain that drummed against the windows of the Ashford mansion like nervous fingers. Amara stood in their bedroom, applying the final touches of makeup while Dante finished dressing in his tuxedo. Even after months of marriage, she still sometimes caught herself staring at him, amazed that this gorgeous, complicated man had chosen her. "You're beautiful," he said softly, appearing behind her in the mirror and fastening a diamond necklace around her throat. The jewelry was an heirloom, he'd explained, worn by Ashford wives for 3 generations. "I'm terrified," Amara admitted, her fingers tracing the unfamiliar weight of the diamonds. "So am I," Dante confessed, his hands settling on her shoulders. "But we're terrified together, which somehow makes it bearable." The party was in full swing by the time they made their entrance, the mansion's main floors transformed into an elegant showcase of wealth and influence. Amara recognized faces from magazine covers and news reports, people whose names were synonymous with power and prestige. The chatter of conversation dimmed noticeably as they appeared at the top of the grand staircase, all eyes turning to assess the mysterious woman who had captured one of America's most eligible bachelors. "Showtime," Dante murmured in her ear, then placed his hand protectively on the small of her back as they descended into the social lion's den. The first hour passed in a blur of introductions and polite conversation. Amara found herself answering the same questions repeatedly: where she was from, how she and Dante had met, her thoughts on San Francisco society. She deflected inquiries about her family background and the speed of their courtship with the grace Dr. Hart had taught her during gallery openings, but she could feel the subtle undercurrents of judgment and speculation. "So refreshing to meet someone with such an artistic perspective," said Margaret Thornfield, the wife of a tech billionaire, her tone suggesting that artistic was synonymous with quaint. "Art helps us see the world differently," Amara replied evenly. "It challenges assumptions and reveals truths that conventional thinking might miss." "How fascinating," Margaret continued, her smile sharp as a blade. "And you met Dante in Las Vegas, I understand? Such an unconventional romantic destination." Before Amara could respond, a new voice cut through the conversation with practiced authority. "Margaret, darling, you must try the champagne. It's from Dante's private collection." Amara turned to find herself face to face with Constance Ashford, Dante's aunt and the unofficial matriarch of the family. Constance was exactly what central casting would order for the role of society dowager: silver hair in a perfect chignon, pearls that had probably been in the family for generations, and the kind of bearing that suggested she'd never doubted her place in the world for a single moment. "Constance," Amara said carefully, "thank you for organizing such a beautiful evening." "It's important for family to support each other," Constance replied, her tone implying that Amara's position as family was still under evaluation. "Though I must say, you're showing quite prominently for, how far along are you, dear?" The question was delivered with surgical precision, designed to highlight either the timing of conception relative to marriage or the possibility of multiple births that might suggest fertility treatments, both topics guaranteed to fuel gossip. "4 months," Amara replied smoothly. "Triplets tend to show earlier than single pregnancies." The slight widening of Constance's eyes was quickly concealed, but not before Amara caught it. News of triplets hadn't been widely shared, and the revelation clearly shifted some calculation in the older woman's mind. "Triplets," Constance repeated, her tone carefully neutral. "How abundant. You must be thrilled to be contributing so significantly to the family legacy." The words were chosen carefully to sound congratulatory while actually reducing Amara's value to her reproductive capacity. But before the conversation could continue, Dante appeared at Amara's side with the instinctive timing of a devoted husband. "Aunt Constance, I see you've met my remarkable wife properly," he said, his arm settling around Amara's waist with possessive pride. "Have you had a chance to discuss her upcoming exhibition at the Morrison Gallery? The art world is quite excited about her latest series." It was news to Amara, but she managed to keep her expression composed while Constance's facade cracked slightly. The Morrison Gallery was one of the most prestigious contemporary art venues on the West Coast, and an exhibition there would establish Amara as a serious artist rather than merely a billionaire's wife. "How wonderful," Constance said, her smile becoming more genuine. "The arts are so important to cultural development." The evening continued with similar diplomatic skirmishes, each conversation a delicate dance of revelation and concealment. Amara found herself gaining confidence as the night progressed, her natural intelligence and artistic perspective winning over guests who had initially approached her with skepticism. But the real test came when Scarlett Pemberton made her entrance. Scarlett moved through the party like a heat-seeking missile, her destination clearly Dante and Amara. She was undeniably beautiful in the way that money could buy, perfectly styled blonde hair, a figure maintained by expensive trainers and exclusive diets, and a red dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. But it was her eyes that caught Amara's attention, calculating, predatory, and fixed on Dante with the intensity of someone who considered him unfinished business. "Dante, darling," Scarlett purred, air-kissing both his cheeks with familiar intimacy. "You look wonderful. Marriage clearly agrees with you." "Scarlett," Dante replied, his tone polite but noticeably cooler. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Amara." "The famous artist," Scarlett said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I've heard so much about you. Such a romantic story, meeting in Las Vegas and marrying so quickly. Like something out of a movie." "It was certainly unexpected," Amara replied, accepting the handshake and noting how Scarlett's grip lingered just long enough to assess the quality of her rings. "And now you're expecting. How exciting." "Though I have to ask," Scarlett's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow carried to nearby listeners, "wasn't it terrifying, getting pregnant so soon after meeting? I mean, you barely knew each other." The comment was designed to highlight the impulsive nature of their relationship while questioning Amara's judgment, but it backfired spectacularly. Several nearby guests turned to listen, and Amara felt a surge of protective fury for her unborn children and her marriage. "Actually," Amara said clearly, her voice carrying the authority she'd learned from years of presenting her work to critics, "I can't imagine anything more natural than wanting to create a family with someone you love. Some connections transcend timelines." "Of course," Scarlett backpedaled quickly, but her eyes had sharpened with something that looked dangerously like determination. "I just meant that Dante has always been so careful about his personal relationships. It's wonderful to see him embracing spontaneity." The implication that she knew Dante's relationship patterns intimately was clear, and Amara felt the familiar tightness in her chest that preceded either tears or artistic inspiration. But before she could respond, Dante's hand tightened on her waist, and his voice cut through the tension with quiet steel. "My wife brings out the best in me," he said simply. "Including the courage to choose love over convention." The words were addressed to Scarlett, but they carried to the surrounding guests like a declaration of war against anyone who questioned his choices. Scarlett's smile became razor-sharp, but she retreated with the grace of someone who knew when a battle was lost but not the war. The rest of the evening passed without major incident, though Amara was acutely aware of being watched, analyzed, and discussed by people who would shape her social standing in this new world. By the time the last guest departed, she felt exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. "You were magnificent," Dante said as they finally closed the door on the evening, his arms encircling her from behind as they stood in the mansion's grand foyer. "I felt like I was on trial," Amara admitted, leaning back against his chest. "You were," Dante said with brutal honesty. "And you passed with flying colors. Did you see how Senator Walsh's wife lit up when you discussed the connection between art and social justice? Or how the Hendersons invited us to their vineyard after you mentioned your interest in sustainable agriculture? What about Scarlett?" Amara asked quietly. Dante's arms tightened around her. "What about her? She's beautiful. And she clearly has history with you. And she fits into this world in ways I'm not sure I ever will." Dante turned her in his arms, his hands framing her face with gentle intensity. "Amara, look at me. Scarlett is part of my past, a past where I made choices based on what other people expected rather than what my heart wanted. You are my present and my future. You are the mother of my children, the woman who makes me want to be better than I ever thought possible. But. No buts, Dante interrupted, pressing his forehead to hers. I chose you. In that Vegas chapel, in that hotel suite, every morning when I wake up next to you, every time someone questions our relationship, I choose you. Always you. The kiss that followed tasted of promise and desperation, of two people clinging to each other against a world that seemed determined to pull them apart. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Amara felt something settle in her chest, not complete security, but the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. 2 weeks later, however, that resolve would be tested in ways neither of them anticipated. Amara was in her studio, working on a new piece inspired by the complex emotions of the party, when Iris burst through the door with an expression that immediately set off alarm bells. We need to talk, Iris said without preamble, closing the door behind her and engaging the lock. What's wrong? Amara set down her brush, noting the way Iris's hands were shaking slightly. I've been doing some digging into your new social circle, Iris began, then held up a hand when Amara started to protest. I know, you didn't ask me to. But something about that Scarlet woman rubbed me the wrong way, so I did what any good friend would do, I investigated. Iris. She hired a private investigator, Iris said bluntly. To dig up information about your background, your family, your finances before you married Dante. And she's not the only one. Amara felt the blood drain from her face. What do you mean? Constance Ashford has been quietly investigating you too. They're looking for ammunition, honey. Something they can use to prove you're not suitable for their precious family legacy. The room seemed to tilt sideways, and Amara gripped the edge of her easel for support. What did they find? The usual stuff anyone could find with a decent Google search and some courthouse records. Your grandmother's financial struggles after she got sick, the fact that you worked 3 jobs to put yourself through art school, that your parents didn't leave you any money when they died. Iris moved closer, her voice gentling. Nothing shameful, nothing that any reasonable person would care about. But in their world. In their world, it makes me a gold digger, Amara finished quietly. It makes you someone who married up, and that threatens their sense of natural order, Iris corrected. But here's the thing that really worried me, they've been asking questions about the timing of your pregnancy, trying to figure out if you were already pregnant when you married Dante. Amara's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where the triplets were growing stronger every day. The babies were conceived on our wedding night. The doctor confirmed the timing. I know that, and you know that, but they're not interested in facts. They're interested in creating doubt. Iris sat down heavily in the chair Dante had placed in the studio for visitors. There's more. Scarlett has been making subtle comments at social gatherings about how convenient your pregnancy was, how lucky you were to catch Dante at such a vulnerable time. Vulnerable time? Apparently, right before he met you, the board had been pressuring him to settle down, make a good marriage for the sake of the company image. Scarlett's been implying that you somehow knew this and targeted him deliberately. Amara felt nauseous, and for once it had nothing to do with morning sickness. Do you think Dante knows about this? I think Dante is a smart man who loves his wife and is trying to protect her from the ugliness of his world, Iris said carefully. But I also think he's underestimating how vicious that world can be. That evening, Amara waited for Dante to return from his office, pacing the terrace despite the fog that made the evening chill bite through her sweater. When she heard his car in the driveway, she took a deep breath and prepared for what might be the most difficult conversation of their marriage. You're up late, Dante said, finding her on the terrace despite the weather. Is everything all right? Are the babies? The babies are fine, Amara interrupted. But we need to talk. Something in her tone made him go still, his businessman's instincts recognizing trouble. What's happened? Iris found out that Scarlett and your aunt have been investigating my background, Amara said without preamble. Hiring private investigators, asking questions about my family's finances, trying to find ammunition to use against me. Dante's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, anger, and finally a resignation that told Amara he wasn't as shocked as she'd hoped he would be. You knew, she said quietly. I suspected, Dante admitted, running his hand through his hair. There have been comments. Questions about why I chose to marry so quickly, speculation about your motivations. I hoped it would die down after people got to know you. And if it doesn't? If they decide I'm not worthy of the Ashford name? What happens to us then? Dante moved closer, reaching for her hands, but Amara stepped back. The hurt that flashed across his face was almost enough to make her cave, but she needed answers more than comfort. Amara, please. You have to know that none of their opinions matter to me. You're my wife, the mother of my children. Nothing they say or do can change that. Can't it? Amara asked, her voice smaller than she intended. What happens when they start questioning whether the babies are even yours? What happens when the board decides that your unsuitable wife is bad for business? What happens when staying married to me starts costing you everything you've worked for? Then I'll choose you, Dante said fiercely. Every time, without hesitation, I'll choose you. Easy to say now, Amara replied, tears finally spilling over. But what about when the choice gets harder? What about when it's not just about love anymore, but about your family legacy, your employees' livelihoods, everything your parents built? Amara. I can't be the reason you lose everything, she whispered. I won't be responsible for destroying what your family spent generations creating. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of foghorns in the bay and the distant hum of city traffic. When Dante finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Is that what you think this is about? Money? Legacy? Corporate politics? Isn't it? Amara asked, meeting his eyes despite the tears blurring her vision. No, Dante said simply. It's about love. It's about the fact that I was slowly dying inside before I met you, going through the motions of a life that felt like an elaborate performance. It's about how you make me laugh, how you challenge my assumptions, how you see beauty in things I never noticed. It's about how I want to be the kind of man our children can be proud of, and I can only be that man with you. The sincerity in his voice, the way he looked at her like she was his anchor in a storm-tossed sea, almost broke her resolve. Almost. But what if love isn't enough, she asked quietly. What if the world we're trying to build together can't survive the pressure they're putting on it? Dante was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute truth. Then we'll build a different world. One where love is enough, where our children grow up knowing that their parents chose each other every single day despite every obstacle. And if that means walking away from all of this, he gestured toward the mansion, the city lights, the symbols of wealth and power that surrounded them, then that's what we'll do. You don't mean that, Amara said, but her voice lacked conviction. Try me, Dante replied, and something in his tone told her he absolutely did mean it. They stood there in the foggy evening, holding each other's gaze across the chasm of doubt that external pressures had created between them. Finally, Dante stepped closer, and this time Amara didn't retreat. I have a confession, he said softly, his hands settling gently on her rounded belly. I've been working on something. A surprise that I hoped would solve some of these problems. What kind of surprise? The Morrison Gallery exhibition I mentioned at the party? It's real. I've been working with their curator to put together a showing of your work, not because you're my wife, but because your art is extraordinary and deserves to be seen. His thumb traced circles on her belly as he spoke. I wanted you to have your own identity in this city, your own success that had nothing to do with me or my money. Amara felt her breath catch. Dante. There's more. I've been quietly setting up a foundation for emerging artists who come from backgrounds like yours. Kids who have talent but not connections, who need someone to believe in them the way Dr. Hart believed in you." His voice grew stronger, more confident. "I want us to use our resources to make a difference, to create the kind of support system you never had but deserved." The tears were falling freely now, but they were different tears, hope mixed with overwhelming love for this man who saw not just her heart but her dreams. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted it to be perfect. Because I wanted to hand you a solution to all the doubts and pressures and prove that marrying me could amplify your impact instead of diminishing it." Dante's forehead touched hers. "But maybe that was wrong. Maybe we should be building these things together instead of me trying to fix everything by myself." Together, Amara agreed, the word feeling like a promise and a prayer. Their kiss was soft, healing, full of the renewed commitment to face whatever came next as partners rather than trying to shield each other from their respective worlds. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, the fog had begun to lift, revealing stars that had been hidden by the marine layer. "There's one more thing," Dante said quietly. "Scarlett has been reaching out to board members, suggesting that our marriage is affecting my judgment, my commitment to the company. There's going to be a meeting next week where they'll likely raise concerns about my personal decisions." Amara felt her stomach clench. "What kind of concerns?" "The kind that come with ultimatums," Dante said grimly. "But I want you to know, whatever they demand, whatever they threaten, my answer will be the same. You. Always you." As they walked back into the house, Amara's hand in Dante's, she felt the weight of the challenges ahead but also the strength of their united front. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new attempts to tear them apart, new tests of their commitment to each other. But tonight, they were together, their love intact, their future growing steady and strong beneath Amara's heart. And sometimes, that was enough to face whatever the world might throw at them. Chapter 4. The board meeting that would determine the fate of Dante's position, and by extension, their marriage, was scheduled for Thursday morning. By Wednesday evening, Amara was a bundle of nervous energy, her hands moving restlessly over canvases that couldn't hold her attention. At 6 months pregnant with triplets, she felt like she was carrying the world beneath her heart, and the added stress of potentially losing everything they'd built was taking its toll. "You need to eat something," Iris said, appearing in the studio doorway with a tray of the gumbo Amara had taught her to make. "Those babies need fuel, even if you're too worried to be hungry." "I can't stop thinking about what happens if they force him to choose," Amara admitted, accepting the bowl but not touching the spoon. "What if loving me costs him everything his family built?" "Then you'll build something new together," Iris replied with the practical wisdom that had sustained their friendship through every crisis. "But honey, you're borrowing trouble. Wait and see what actually happens before you start planning for disaster." That night, Dante held her closer than usual, both of them pretending to sleep while their minds raced with possibilities neither wanted to voice. When morning came, he dressed in his most authoritative suit, armor for the battle ahead, and kissed her with the intensity of a man who wasn't sure when he'd be able to do it again. "Whatever happens," he said against her lips, "remember that you saved me. Meeting you, marrying you, loving you, it's the best thing I've ever done." "Don't talk like you're saying goodbye," Amara whispered, her hands fisting in his jacket. "I'm not," Dante assured her. "I'm just making sure you know how much you mean to me before I go fight for our future." The morning dragged by with excruciating slowness. Amara tried to paint, tried to read, tried to focus on anything other than the clock ticking toward the moment when Dante would face the board's ultimatum. Iris sat with her, both women jumping every time a phone rang or a car passed by the house. At 11:47 a.m., Amara's phone buzzed with a text from Dante, "It's done. Coming home to you." The cryptic message told her nothing about the outcome, and the 3 hours until Dante's car pulled into the driveway felt like 3 years. When she heard his key in the door, Amara was waiting in the foyer, her heart hammering against her ribs. One look at his face told her everything she needed to know. "We won," he said simply, and then she was in his arms, both of them laughing and crying and holding each other like they'd just survived a natural disaster. "What happened?" Amara asked when she could finally speak coherently. Scarlett overplayed her hand, Dante explained, his arm still wrapped around her as if he couldn't bear to let go. "She tried to present the board with evidence that you were a gold digger who had trapped me into marriage. But her so-called evidence was full of inaccuracies and assumptions that made her look desperate rather than concerned. And then I presented them with the numbers from the art foundation we've been planning, showed them the positive press coverage from your gallery appearances, demonstrated how our marriage has actually enhanced the company's reputation rather than damaging it." Dante's smile was fierce with victory. Turns out that having a wife who's respected in the art world and committed to philanthropy is exactly the kind of image they want for Ashford Holdings. "What about Constance?" Constance surprised everyone by standing up and saying that she'd been wrong to question our marriage, that she could see how happy I was and how good you were for the family. Dante's expression softened. "I think meeting you at the party changed her mind. You won her over without even trying." Relief flooded through Amara so powerfully that her knees went weak. Dante caught her immediately, his hands steady and sure as he guided her to the living room sofa. "There's more," he said, settling beside her with one hand on her belly where their children were celebrating with enthusiastic kicks. "The board voted unanimously to support the Art Foundation. We're going to be able to help dozens of young artists get the education and opportunities they deserve." "Together," Amara said, the word carrying all the hope and determination she felt. "Together," Dante agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted like victory and new beginnings. 3 months later, the Morrison Gallery was packed with San Francisco's art elite for the opening of Amara Baptiste Ashford's first major West Coast exhibition. The paintings on display told the story of transformation. From the raw pain of Fractures to the luminous joy of her newest piece, Trinity, which depicted 3 angels dancing in golden light. Amara moved through the crowd in a flowing maternity dress that made her look like a goddess of creativity, accepting congratulations and fielding questions from critics who had come expecting to see vanity art from a billionaire's wife and found instead work that spoke to the universal human experience of love, loss, and renewal. "The depth of emotion in these pieces is extraordinary," she overheard one prominent critic saying to another. "This isn't someone painting as a hobby, this is a serious artist with something important to say." Dante appeared at her side, resplendent in his tuxedo and beaming with pride that could probably be seen from space. "How are you feeling? Do you need to sit down?" "I need to enjoy this," Amara replied, gesturing toward the red dots appearing next to paintings as they sold. "I need to remember that this is what we fought for, the right to be ourselves and still belong to each other." Dr. Evelyn Hart, who had flown in from New Orleans for the opening, approached with tears in her eyes. "Your grandmother would be so proud," she said, embracing Amara carefully around her enormous belly. "This is exactly what she dreamed for you, success on your own terms, love that enhances rather than diminishes your light." As the evening wound down, Amara found herself standing before Trinity, the painting that had somehow captured her hopes for their unborn children. The 3 figures in the painting seemed to dance with life, their forms intertwined but distinct, supporting each other while maintaining their individual beauty. "It's magnificent," came a familiar voice behind her. Amara turned to find Constance Ashford, elegant as always but with an expression that was genuinely warm for the first time since they'd met. "Thank you," Amara said carefully, still not entirely sure where she stood with Dante's aunt. "I owe you an apology," Constance said without preamble. "I let my fears about change and my assumptions about your motivations cloud my judgment. But watching you tonight, seeing how you've carved out your own place in this world while making my nephew happier than I've ever seen him. I was wrong. We all protect the things we love," Amara replied diplomatically. "Family is worth fighting for." "Yes," Constance agreed, her gaze moving to where Dante was deep in conversation with a gallery patron. "And you've made our family stronger, not weaker." Those children you're carrying will be lucky to have parents who chose love over convention. The validation from Dante's family matriarch felt like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. Amara was no longer the outsider fighting for acceptance, she was family, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. Later that night, back in their bedroom with her feet soaking in warm water and Dante massaging her shoulders, Amara reflected on how completely her life had transformed. "Do you ever miss it?" Dante asked quietly. "Your old life, before all the complications that come with my world?" "I miss the simplicity sometimes," Amara admitted. "But I don't miss feeling small, or unworthy, or like I had to choose between love and authenticity." "What about you? Do you regret giving up your perfectly controlled bachelor existence for a pregnant wife who rearranges your furniture and leaves paint stains on your expensive towels?" Dante's laugh was rich with contentment. "I regret wasting 33 years trying to be someone else's version of the perfect son, perfect businessman, perfect heir. I don't regret a single moment since I met you, not the impulsive proposal, not the Vegas wedding, not the social complications or the business pressure. You saved my life, Amara. You gave me permission to be real." 2 weeks later, at 34 weeks pregnant, Amara went into early labor during a foundation planning meeting. The triplets, apparently eager to make their entrance into the world, arrived within hours of each other, 2 girls and a boy, all healthy and perfect and loud enough to announce their presence to the entire maternity ward. "They're beautiful," Dante whispered, tears streaming down his face as he held his son while Amara cradled their daughters. "Look what we made. Look what our love created." The babies were indeed beautiful, perfect blends of their parents, with Dante's strong features softened by Amara's warmth, her golden skin tone enhanced by his classical bone structure. But more than their physical beauty was the way they seemed to complete something that had been missing from both parents' lives. "What should we name them?" Amara asked, exhausted but glowing with maternal joy. "I was thinking," Dante said carefully, "maybe we could honor your grandmother. And my parents? Give them names that connect them to their heritage while letting them create their own identities." They settled on Celeste Baptiste Ashford, Aurora Baptiste Ashford, and Gabriel Baptiste Ashford, names that spoke of light and music and strength, names that carried the best of both families while promising unlimited potential for the future. 6 months later, Amara stood in their renovated home studio, painting while the triplets napped in their cribs nearby. The space perfectly blended both their worlds, expensive equipment and climate control courtesy of Dante's resources, but filled with the organized chaos and creative energy that made it unmistakably hers. She was working on a new series about motherhood, marriage, and the way love transforms us into versions of ourselves we never knew were possible. The paintings were selling before she could finish them, and there was talk of a solo show in New York that would establish her as one of the most important contemporary artists of her generation. "How are my 4 favorite people?" Dante asked, appearing in the doorway with the quiet step he'd perfected to avoid waking sleeping babies. "Perfect," Amara replied, setting down her brush to be swept into his arms. "Tired, covered in paint and baby food, and absolutely perfect." "I have some news," Dante said, his excitement barely contained. "The foundation received our first major grant. We're going to be able to sponsor 50 young artists next year, provide them with everything they need to develop their talents." "Really?" Amara felt tears spring to her eyes, happy tears that seemed to come more easily since becoming a mother. "Really? And there's more. The board wants to expand internationally, create satellite programs in cities around the world. They want us to travel together, identify talented artists who need support, build something that could change lives on a global scale." Amara looked around the studio, at the evidence of her success and happiness, at the children who represented their love made manifest, at the husband who had never stopped choosing her despite every obstacle. "When do we start?" she asked. As if summoned by their parents' excitement, the triplets began stirring in their cribs, Gabriel first, then Celeste, then Aurora, their different personalities already emerging in the ways they woke up and demanded attention. Dante moved to lift Gabriel while Amara gathered their daughters, and for a moment they stood there as a family, complete and perfect and ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. "You know," Amara said as they settled into the comfortable chaos of feeding time, "I need to send Garrett and Cordelia a thank you note." "What?" Dante looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "If they hadn't betrayed me, I never would have gone to Vegas. Never would have met you, never would have had the courage to choose love over safety." Amara smiled at the irony. "Their betrayal led me to the greatest love of my life. Our children are going to love that story," Dante said, bouncing Gabriel gently while the baby gurgled with contentment. "How mommy and daddy's love story started with the worst night of mommy's life turning into the best decision she ever made. And how sometimes," Amara added, looking around at the life they'd built together, "the most impulsive choices are actually our hearts finally finding the courage to claim what they've always known they deserved."